Well, welcome everyone to the second episode of our second year of Ideas and Lives. You can find us on ideasandlives.org or any app that does podcasts. And we're delighted today to have Larry Kotlikoff, a wonderful economist. And we'll let Zvi introduce Larry. And Zvi Bodhi is my partner here on this show, wonderful financial economist. Bob. And he's a great guy. So go ahead, Zvi.
Thank you. Well, first I want to clarify. I'm not sure if this is a podcast or a webcast, but either way, you get to see us as well as listen to us, but you don't have to look at us if you don't want to. So I've known Larry for quite a while, and going back to the mid-1980s, I guess, when we worked at the National Bureau of Economic Research together on the pension project. And ever since then, we've, shared ideas and experiences and all the rest. So having said that, and I voted for him when he ran for president, but we'll get to that later.
Bless you.
Yes, I was among the many disappointed voters. Okay. So Larry, we're going to start with a very interesting fact, I think, that you are one of two identical twins. Is that not right?
Fraternal twins. My brother's.
I thought your brother was a. No, he's not.
Yeah,
he's
fraternal.
Not a replica.
No, 5 minutes older. He's 5 minutes older and much better looking, no question. Much smarter.
Really? Oh, I didn't know that. Okay, well. Tell
us about your upbringing anyway.
Right. Tell us about your upbringing.
Okay, so we grew up in Pennsauken, New Jersey, which is right next to Camden. My dad and his brothers had a department store in East Camden. It was the largest department store. It sold everything. It's like almost a city block long. And it was the first department store and the last department store in Camden. It was started in 1909. I think it closed in 1975. And
now that's like a suburb of Philadelphia, isn't it?
Camden's right across the bridge from Philly.
Yeah.
No, but it's a city of its own of considerable size.
Yeah, it's in a different state.
Right, New Jersey. And it became probably the most dangerous city in the world. There was a huge amount of white flight. So that's why our store, we survived Sears and Lit Brothers and Lord and Taylor's. They were all in Camden, and they all went down out of business. We were the last one. The last night the store was open, it was broken into 3 times. So it was. I think the police were in cahoots with the criminals, and so it's a story of urban destruction under the rubric of urban renewal. Because what they did is they made a super highway right through the center of Camden to the bridge from New York, so you could go right to Camden through to Philadelphia so they destroyed Camden. They broke it into 2 pieces. And then there was also the time of the migration from the south of blacks, and there was a lot of racism. So people fled the city to go live in Cherry Hill, where was the new mall and McDonald's. Anyway, I grew up working from about age 7. I'm sure they violated child labor rules, because I was working over the holidays from 9 a.m. till 9 o'clock at night, 5 days a week over Christmas.
What did they have you doing?
Well, we did everything. We did inventory, we did ticketing we spent a lot of time putting prices on the products. Talk about menu costs of pricing new goods. I know all about that. Then I was into selling, wrapping presents. We had huge lines to wrap presents, doing this with my cousins. So it was quite an education from a very early age in business. And I also
in hard work.
Yeah, I was also thinking about your podcast and the fact you're going to ask me some questions about my background. and how I got into economics and personal finance and started working in
Right.
that area, among others. And it occurred to me that, I watched my parents, my dad invest all his money, all his life savings in the store, and then it went broke. And he also became ill with Parkinson's around age 59. So he died in his early 80s. So at an early age, around 18, I became my twin brother. We just started college at Penn, and he's now the provost of Cornell. And at the time, I viewed him as like something of a drug addict. He wasn't taking heavy drugs; he was taking marijuana. But I realized that he was always a foot shorter than me, so I always had this role of taking care of him. And then I went off to Germany in high school as an exchange student, and came back a year later. He was 10 inches taller, or 6 inches. It really pissed me off, but I still had this concept I have to take care of my brother. And so there I had my parents to kind of think about, my brother. My sister turned out to kind of earn more money than either of us, but it wasn't so clear she was going to earn much money. So at an early age, at 18, I decided I had an obligation, a liability that I had to deal with. So when I went to college for me was mostly working. I was running a poster shop, working 40 hours a week, making posters. On the side, I was doing college, and I employed my brother, whose main occupation in the poster shop was playing foosball. I couldn't.
So did he go to University of Pennsylvania too?
My mom actually figured out that if she went and got a job at Penn, we could all go to Penn for free tuition. She got us all in. Somehow she finagled an arrangement with the admissions director she became friendly with. We all got in. We all did well. He was an English major. He ended up, this is an incredible story. I could not believe this. My twin brother, he wasn't that great in high school in science or math. At least I didn't think so. I was like the valedictorian of the class. I was the exchange student. He graduates, works in Germany as a factory worker. He wanted to replicate my experience. Comes back, he's unemployed, rebuilds a Volkswagen for the summer. Then he gets a job as a stable hand at Penn's large animal facility. He was a student of Philip Roth in English, an English major. He goes and works for this large animal facility, and he starts assisting in the operations. And after about a year, he's doing more and more intense things with the vets there. He calls me up. He says he wants to become a vet. I said, well, you're not that good in science or math. You have to take all these pre-med courses to get to apply to vet school. Yeah, I'm going to become a vet. So I helped him out a little bit financially to the extent I could, because I was also helping my parents. And at this point, and after about 3 years, he takes night courses after working all day long with the horses. Takes nice courses at Penn. Then he applies to vet school at Penn, and he doesn't get in. So the following year he gets in, and I thought, well, this is unbelievable that he actually could get into vet school, from this background of being what I thought was a drug addict. He's my brother. I knew he had no aptitude for science. Okay, so he gets in, he graduates #1 in the class. Then he goes and gets a PhD in physiology at University of California, Davis, in 3 years. Goes back and teaches, becomes a professor at Penn. Then a few years later, he's hired at Cornell. They build him a lab with 40,000 mice, a huge facility at Cornell. Then he's doing big NIH grants, programming his own computer, writing articles in Nature and Science. And then, he's much more interesting than I am. He becomes
you're telling us his whole life story here.
It's because it really connects to some of the things I try to do in Money Magic, which is to give kids the idea that you just don't know unless you try things. Then he's made the dean of the vet school, and then he's became provost of Cornell about 6-8 years ago. He's now the provost of Cornell.
Wow,
and he has left his brother in the ashes. Okay.
Well,
We
let's
wouldn't
hear
say
about
that.
you almost became president of the United States. What are you talking about?
I was trying to beat him out here. My sister also, she was the head of Nina Ricci Perfume. She started out as a paralegal from Penn. She gets this Penn degree in English, becomes a paralegal, then starts working for marketing in Clairol. In a few years, she's running the president of a major US company with a beautiful offices looking out over Central Park in New York.
Wait a second, is this Barbara?
My sister Barbara, yeah. And
Well, now she's head of marketing for your firm.
yeah, so she in her 70s and I'm in my 70s. She's working with me running our company. And so we're having a good time together. Of course, she's always telling me what to do because she's the older sister by 2 years. So she's much smarter than either of her brothers.
So you got into economics at Penn, is that right?
Yeah, I went to Penn and I first, as I describe in the book, I wanted to become a doctor. And then I ran into dissecting a frog in biology. It just,
That was the end of it. By the way, you mentioned your book. We should say right off that what you're referring to is this backwards?
No, that's right.
Oh, no.
It just came
Okay.
out this last week. It came out. It's brand new, hot off the shelves.
Okay. So,
Money Magic and Economist Secrets to More Money, Less Risk, and a Better Life.
right.
And as
Good. And it goes
you were
with the
thinking of
software that your company produces.
yeah, I started. So what I did in this book is this is my 20th book. My brother has written 0 books, just to be clear, just to razz him. And but
Your
this
brother, the
is
provost.
he's written a lot more science articles and nature articles. And anyway, so this book is a bringing together the findings from my software company that you've helped me with over the years, think about new products and new ways to develop the program. But the program is embedding or trying to relay economics-based financial planning. It's much more powerful than any software program out there, I believe, in terms of personal
I
finance.
second that.
Yeah. So I learned a whole lot of things in the 29 years I've been running this program and marketing it to people and putting up case studies and writing articles. And not everybody wants to buy software, I learned over time. They just want to hear what to do. And so I had all this knowledge. And then there's also the knowledge that you and other finance economists have developed over the years. Bob Merton, who endorsed the book very strongly, the dean of finance, all-time top finance economist. And going back to work by Irving Fisher in the 1920s about the life cycle theory of saving, all this work has not been communicated very well to the public. So I tried to combine it all in this book, Money Magic, so that people wouldn't have to run software, they wouldn't have to read classic articles, Bob's 800-page whatever volume on the continuous finance, right? And learn.
Well, it's not that long, but
Well, that's that long,
but it's pretty dense. Yeah.
So they don't have to learn continuous time finance, Ito's lemma. They would just learn the fundamentals. So that's what I tried to, and to the public, the reason I called it Money Magic is if you're conveying this to somebody who has no background in this, and certainly Wall Street is not conveying this because Wall Street is trying to sell product to people. So they have a whole different approach. It's product oriented, sales oriented. If you convey this to people, it becomes like magic. This is like a magical, the C parts in terms of revelation of what it is you should be doing. It's common economic sense, but when you when you get it, part of it's coming out of the program, the software that makes calculations that are too complicated for humans. So part of that's magical, saying, look, do this, don't this. This pays and this doesn't pay. Roth conversion, in this context, it does pay. This other context, it's crazy to do it. But there's also just all the whole history of finance being tried to convey that, all the work that you've done and others.
So let's go back a few steps.
Yep.
You got interested in economics. You obviously had a family interest because of what happened within your family, and your work as you were worker at a young age, so you got familiar a bit with the labor market.
By the way,
So who were-
does that count as apprenticeship, Bob?
No, but anyway.
Okay.
Who were some of your professors at Penn that maybe influenced you at all? And
Well, there are three fantastic professors. Also, Yakir Plesner, who's a mutual friend. He was a fourth fantastic professor. But the first was Bob Pollack, who taught me introductory economics. Who's at the St. Louis University in Washington University in St. Louis. Sorry, you got it backwards. He's just the most fantastic teacher. So after taking his course, I was sold. And then he was good buddies with Steve Ross, who had just come from Harvard as a grad, just graduated from Harvard. He was teaching at Penn. So we all took a seminar, he and Steve, Bob and Steve, on social choice, on arrows and possibility theorem and other things like that. So that was fantastic, a small little group with Steve Ross and then Bob Ethier teaching trade. Every undergraduate should have a fantastic course in international trade. It's just grounds you in in microeconomics. And Ethier's course was just out of this world. It was tough as nail. It was really hard, but if you put your heart and soul into it, you learned. So those three guys, and I think Steve got three of us into Harvard from Penn in the same year. Imagine
Really?
we get to Larry Weiss, Nancy Stoker, who's at Chicago. Larry Weiss, who did brilliant work before he became a partner for Goldman Sachs, and then went off on his own doing financial trading. But if you look at, you could just get a fantastic education in economics just from reading Larry Weiss's co-authored and singly authored work, Lawrence Weiss. So I'll put a plug in for my old friend and roommate. But the three of us getting into Harvard, it all had to do with Steve Ross being close friends with Zvi Grilikus, who was the head of admissions that year. And Steve and he were good buddies. So he calls them up and he says, look, take the one guy from India, take the one guy from Chile, who turned out to be the president of Chile, Sebastian Pinero, who just stepped down after the new election. And take one guy from Mexico, take one guy from Iran, but take three people from Penn. Can you imagine? So he got all three of us in. He had that much influence. And Steve, of course, was a fantastic finance economist, and we're all buddies with him. And I was in love with Steve. And I'm so tragic that he died so young, but he probably would have gotten the Nobel Prize.
Probably would have, yes.
Yeah.
so then you went to Harvard. You were exposed to the Cambridge atmosphere after being in Philadelphia and its suburbs. How did that influence you?
Well, I was nervous as hell because I was sure that they had accepted me as a clerical mistake. I had never been to Boston. I had no idea. It was like a foreign planet. I had spent a year in Europe, so I had somewhat degree of sophistication, but I was totally intimidated. I get to Harvard and I meet these people, and I'm sure I'm going to do the worst in the class on the theory exam, which is coming up like in 6 weeks. I ended up by some freak of nature accident getting the top grade in the class. And I remember walking in the Harvard yard with Sebastian Pinero, the president of Chile. And he and I were became bosom buddies from day one. And Sebastian tells me, I just looked at the grades from the theory exam and I don't understand something. And Sebastian always has this kind of ironic sense of humor. And I said, well, what's going on? What don't you understand, Sebastian? He said, well, I looked at the grades and you won't believe who's number one. I said, well, you must be number one, Sebastian, because Sebastian, he was very, very a brilliant guy. He got his PhD in 3 years. I said, you must be it, right? How far down was I? He said, no, you won't believe this. I just don't understand. It doesn't make any sense to me. You're number one and I'm number two. And at that point, I immediately flipped into gear and I put my arm around him. I said, Sebastian, you're from a developing country. Your English is, so you're trying to learn economics in a foreign language. you did really well. Be very proud of yourself. And that, of course, completely twisted the knife right inside him. And this was our relationship. We're very close friends to this day. I've been down there many times. And he's done, I think, a fantastic job in just terrible circumstances in Chile. I think Chilean people should be very proud of him, and he should be proud of what he did to help them. Because he took on a job, as many, he's super wealthy. He didn't need to become president of Chile he's a billionaire. He became one of the top, most wealthy people in South America, and he worked day and night to help the public. That should be
Now
appreciated.
it was inherited wealth, though, right? His
No,
family.
no.
Sorry.
He went back. I mean, his dad was a UN ambassador from Chile. They were well off, but not super well off. He came back and set up MasterCard. He saw that there was no credit cards in Chile. He went back and took his economic, moxie, and he didn't really pursue economics. He pursued finance, business. He became very close friends with Steve Jobs and brought Apple into Chile, and he owned the Chilean Airlines at some point. Just very entrepreneurial guy. And if you watch his, if you could read, if you look at his videos, you'll see a guy who's very modest.
Well, his brother was the architect of Chile's pension reform, which became the model for all of Latin America.
Yeah,
let's go back to you, Larry. So you're at Harvard. You majored in what?
I majored in PhD in economics. Had Martin Feldstein as my thesis director, who worked in public finance. Before that, I was thinking about becoming an economic historian, so I worked with Bob Fogel as his research assistant. I had so many, I feel like a Forrest Gump proceeding through economics, because I had so many interactions with so many people, like right at exactly the pinnacle of something critical happening to them, like Bob Fogel writing Time on the Cross, and there was this kind of very vicious conference on this book, which a lot of people accused him of racism, even though he was married to Enid, who was a lovely Black lady, and he was anything but racist, but people at the time accused him of that because he was trying to talk about the economics of slavery, which was it was just so morally repugnant that nobody should discuss it kind of abstractly. Anyway, I was around him. Ken Arrow became a friend with because he was a professor he was our micro teacher, and I stayed friends with him right till the end, till he passed away. Became friends with Zvi Grillikis, Franco Modigliani, became personal friends with these people.
Did you take a course with Franco?
No, but right after grad school, I wrote a paper with Larry Summers, which is the most cited paper of Larry Summers' career, by the way. And I think
what was that about?
This was on the understanding the role of bequest to wealth accumulation. How much of it was life cycle wealth accumulation, people saving for retirement? How much of the wealth that we have for example, the U.S. was due to people accumulating wealth for retirement versus receiving it, inheriting it, and just holding onto it to leave to their kids? And it turned out we showed that about, after you accounted for some general equilibrium feedback effects, it was about half of the wealth was due to saving for bequests, not for retirement. And Franco took big offense to that because he was saying almost 90% of it was due to wealth accumulation for retirement. So we got involved in a huge controversy back and forth in the journals. And then at one point he invited me down to his beautiful house in Martha's Vineyard, and we spent a couple of days debating this. And he's driving me around in his Miata, and I remember he taking me to the airport. He had so much desire to fight with me over this and can debate it. In a very friendly manner, lovely guy. That we're late to the ferry, and he's got this hat. He's driving 90 miles an hour in this Miata with the top down, loses his baseball cap. But I would see him like every couple months for lunch, right up to the. So this is the kind of experience I had with so many economists. Paul Samuelson, I became friends with. I know Zvi, you were close with Paul, and now recently Bob Merton. Thanks to you, Zvi, connecting us. So I just feel so privileged to have had more or less by accident, interaction with a who's who of economists.
Well, that tends to
Well, I'm not,
happen in Cambridge, in the Cambridge, Boston area.
but I'm
Yeah,
sure it's not entirely by coincidence
No,
because A, you got a position at Boston University, so you'd be nearby.
yeah,
And B, I'm sure people enjoy your company. So
well, he is a controversial economist. So the argument with Franco was just one of many.
yes.
now you've become very much known for your generational accounting work. And how did you happen? First of all, why don't you tell our listeners what that is? Remember,
Sure.
there are a lot of non-economists. And number two, how did you get interested in it?
Well, really good question. So, so generational accounting is trying to understand how much of a burden current and past generations, fiscal burden, tax burden, are leaving to our kids and future generations. We're concerned about accumulating debt. We know that Senator Manchin, for example, right now is concerned about the burden being left. And I think everybody is at the back of their mind worried that we're accumulating too many obligations. And so I had a thesis director, Martin Feldstein, who was focused on, Social Security as an obligation that future generations had to pay, although he didn't kind of focus on it that way. He talked about Social Security as kind of a form of wealth. We have this asset, these benefits coming in the future, and we should incorporate that in our analysis of inequality of wealth. It's not fungible. You can't sell your Social Security benefits to somebody, but we should incorporate it in our analysis of wealth. So I kind of picked up on this, and it kind of puzzled me. Why is it that we have this? We think about the debt that our kids owe, that we're leaving to our kids as official debt, but this other program, these benefits that have to be paid off, or the Medicare benefits, or the paying for future defense spending. How come that is not counted as a burden to future generations? Well, it occurred to me, and Marty never kind of saw this so clearly, even though I wrote about it quite a bit. It occurred to me that what we describe as the burden on our kids depends on what we decide to put onto the books, what Congress decides to register as an official liability as relative to not registering that way. So Bob, if I'm Uncle Sam and I take some money from you this year and I promise to pay you back money in the future, and I take that money and spend it, then I've got to come to your kids or grandkids to tax them to pay you off. Now, if the money I take from you, I say that's a loan from you to me, and I give you back a government bond, now it becomes an obligation that's on the books. What I owe you in the future is registered as on the books. But if I call the money I take from you Social Security taxes, then the promise of benefits that I am making to you is not put on the books. So that's why we have to do the accounting in a label-free manner. Otherwise, so all these measures of of official debt are basically economically meaningless.
So in a way, from a business standpoint, you want a more accurate balance sheet. Would that be a way of?
You want to put everything on the books. You want to have a complete balance sheet that puts every obligation that future generations are going to have to pay on the books, and every tax that they're not going to have to pay because current generations are paying them also on the books. So you want to have a complete, and this is using the government's what we call intertemporal budget constraint framework, and that's what so I wrote a series of papers.
Intertemporal budget constraint means what?
Means that the government has to pay, that somebody has to pay the government's for the government spending. It's either current generations or future generations. It has to come out of the hides in terms of the lower consumption of current or future generations. That's basically, economists, if we have anything, we have budget constraints. And we cannot consume, and if current generations can't pay zero taxes and consume to their heart's delight, and somehow have the economy pay for that because there's just not enough resources. So ultimately, this comes down to the economy's intertemporal budget constraint that says what we can spend as a nation, whether it's the government spending or I'm talking about, think about the consumption as being hot dogs. So the only good in the world would be hot dogs. So the government gets to consume some hot dogs for the army and for the president for his lunch, and then the public gets to consume hot dogs through time. Well, how much hot dogs we can consume in present value depends on how our current wealth and our future labor income, our human wealth. Those two things have to pay for the hot dogs. And we can arrange things so that future generations get to consume very few hot dogs and current generations get to consume most of the hot dogs, or vice versa. That's generational policy. And generational accounting is basically saying, how much are we screwing future generations out of their fair share of hot dogs? So I did work with Alan Auerbach, just to be clear. Alan was just honored for as a distinguished fellow of the American Economic Association just yesterday, and he certainly, or 2 days ago, warmly deserves that honor. And also Jagdish Gokhale, who was my grad student, and we wrote a series of papers on this, and then I started writing books for the public. One was called The Clash of Generations. I wrote with Scott Burns, and The Coming Generational Storm. Well, that was even before with Scott Burns. So I was on to this issue of generational expropriation early on.
And where do you think it is now within the profession?
Well, I think
Economics profession.
I think people are trying to put it by the wayside, thinking somehow we don't have any long-term fiscal problem, but we have an enormous long-term fiscal problem. And it's worse than any developed country, as far as I can tell. We're short about 8% of GDP through the end of time in terms of, we need to raise taxes by 8% of GDP forever. Every year, taxes have to be 8% higher in order to pay for all the spending the government is projected by the Congressional Budget Office to do. Now, just to give you an idea, Social Security collects maybe about 4% of GDP in taxes. We'd have to have, in effect, 2 more payroll taxes, so you get a sense of how broke this country is and how much of a burden we're leaving for our kids. So the situation has just gotten worse and worse and worse. The European Union does this generational accounting that's fiscal. We also call it fiscal gap analysis. There's something called the S2 indicator. They put out a report every 3 years called the Fiscal Sustainability Report. So they have taken to heart this work and said, we're going to do it formally. The US government does no generational accounting. I've talked to one CBO director after another down in their office in Washington, say, you have to do fiscal gap accounting, you have to do generational accounting, we have to see how we're treating future generations. We can't just run across the cliff and leave our kids bankrupt with sky-high tax rates. They'll leave the country.
Didn't they do it on an experimental basis several years back?
No, what I got was a group of senators to endorse something called the Inform Act. It was to about 8 senators, 4 Democrats, 4 Republicans endorsed this, and it got nowhere in Congress. It was a formal act that would require the CBO, the GAO, OMB to do generational accounting every year, and it never got anywhere. So this just shows you the politicians have no concern for anything but the next election. They don't care about the next generation. So I'm more concerned than ever. And the ramifications of this, people like John Cochran, who's a top economist out at Stanford, think that the inflation that we're seeing right now is reflective of our long-term fiscal imbalance, because if inflation goes up, prices go up right now, that waters down the real value of the government debt. So it's in effect a fiscal adjustment. So he's saying that the adjustment is happening through the back door. We're actually getting current generations to pay more, because we're taking the debt that the government owes them and making it worth less, not absolutely worthless, in terms of the number of hot dogs you can buy, because prices just went up. So if you have a nominal treasury bill, not a tip or not an I bond that's inflation indexed, well, it just lost 6% of its value, right? In the last year, 6.8% was our inflation rate over 2021. That's a big reduction. So we're talking about 7% of GDP, because official debt is 7%, is 100% of GDP right now.
So we're muddling through partly through the inflation tax.
Yeah, but that's not going to take us very far. We owe basically more like 8 years of GDP, not 1 year of GDP, and not 7% of 1 year of GDP. So we're never going to be able to pay this off using inflation.
Okay, so now tell us the story of your run for presidency.
Okay. All right. Well, I never really thought I would run for president, although I have to tell you, I mean, I win this. I did fantasize on several occasions about, gee, if the press really got interested in this and I took off and because, look, Macron was an out of nowhere candidate and he succeeded. So I had to think about, how would I deal with nuclear weapons? How would I started fantasizing my brain as I ran for president about circumstances where this would be very, very difficult job. So anyway, that's a side statement, but mainly the reason I ran, apart from fantasy, was I felt that the policies being presented to the public were so far afield from what economists would recommend that there was an obligation of an economist to talk to the other economists, bring together a set of policy platform that had very simple policies, not 30-page policies, but 10 bullet policies on fixing Social Security, on fixing healthcare, universal healthcare, on fixing the tax system, on fixing education, on fixing banking so we never have a great recession again. How do we fix all these things with 10 bullet points? And I felt that, so I put that in this platform, which went 100 pages. And so I ran as a write-in candidate. In the last election, I ran against Trump and Clinton. Nobody knows about this except a few people.
No, I didn't know about that.
Yeah, I ran 2016. And I had to get registered in all the states, because unless you go through the process of getting signatures and paying money, your vote will not be counted. So Mickey Mouse can never win this election, the presidency, because he's not formally registered. So I was registered to the point where I could have become legally elected president. And it's an
How do
ordeal.
you get all the signatures?
Well, I had to, my wife and I went to Maine, and we just went to a mall and we started talking to people and said, would you sign this? It wasn't a huge number of signatures, but we got enough people so this was and I hired somebody to go to the different states around the country, and so it was a big effort. But meanwhile, I'm writing this platform. I write this platform, and the day that Trump is elected, I take this platform and I transform it into a book called You're Hired. Not You're Fired, but You're Hired. And it's on my website at kotlikoff.net. It's a free download. Everybody can see what the economics profession would say to do to fix the country. So Joe Biden now, President Biden, who I have frankly, I think he's doing a B+ job. And that's a very high grade for me, okay? I'm a tough
How about
critic.
Janet Yellen?
Janet, I love Janet. And Janet was my first macro teacher. She's doing an A+ job, okay? And her husband, George Akerlof, he's the other Nobel laureate endorsing the book. He says it's probably the best financial advice book ever written. So I'm rather, I can't give Janet anything but an A+, but I do think Janet's doing a fantastic job. But Biden, getting back to Biden, so what could he go from B+ to A+? All he has to do is open You're Hired, the book. It's You're Hired, a Trump playbook for fixing America's economy. And I don't know that President Trump actually can read. to tell you the truth. So, or that any of his advisors were able to read, but they certainly didn't read this book. But if President Biden would open this book, he would see middle of the road proposals to fix things that would garner both bipartisan support and would certainly be exactly what he wants, including getting universal health care. I'm proposing, as are many top health experts like George Halverson, who ran Kaiser Permanente for many years as the CEO, adopting Medicare for all, but it's Medicare Part C for all, the Advantage plan, the Republican version of Medicare, because it's the one that actually people are signing up for. It's the one that is that economists like, that many economists have endorsed this kind of basic version of competition in providing healthcare. But you could have Medicare for all, the Republican version. They could both take credit. The Democrats, Republicans, could be adopted tomorrow. All he has to do is open the damn book, or get one of his advisors to open the book. And I'm happy to come down and talk to him about the
Well,
book.
you know, I have to express a bit of questioning about this because, you know, we have economists ranging from Paul Krugman, who seems to have a lot of influence from his column, although I'm not a big fan, but to, as you mentioned, John Cochran out at Stanford. How confident are you that this would generate consensus of
You didn't mention Larry Summers.
Summers? Well, Larry, because he's not quite on the extremes that.
Well, you know, I think, yeah, I mean, Paul tends to be quite political, although, and you know, I've recently interacted with him on some issues of inequality, which I felt he was much more balanced outside of his column. And, you know, Larry's very political in his writings. I'm, you know, the guy who has his most cited, you know, Larry and I have his most cited articles with me. So I know Larry quite well. I think he's gotten too political over the years. But if you look at people like Victor Fuchs, Rahm Emanuel, people that are, you know, well-established, healthy economists, Uwe.
Not Rahm Emanuel, but his brother.
His brother, Zeke Emanuel.
Zeke.
Yeah. Yeah, the Princeton economist who tragically passed away. The
Swedish.
The German, wasn't he?
German.
Yeah.
I'm forgetting his. I'll have to come back to that. Anyway, he was also a big fan of that. I think these three people would endorse this overnight because I think it's their plan too. Of course, the one from Princeton passed away. So I talked to a lot of, you know, health economists before I wrote this part of this platform. I wanted to make sure I wasn't off base. And so, yeah, we could get health insurance, universal health insurance at a much lower price, at more like 12% of GDP, not 18%. If we want to save our kids, we have to have universal health insurance and do it in a way that gets that price tag down from 18 to 12%. Now, I'm not saying that traditional Medicare for all couldn't do the same thing, but there's not the support, there's not the economic efficiency associated with it. And, you know, so I was a fan of Bernie Sanders. I wanted him to become president over Joe Biden because I thought he would galvanize the country more, and that we'd be better off having his version of Medicare for all than my version. That versus nothing, okay? His version versus nothing. My version is better than his, I think, but his version is better than nothing. And I think his version, a lot of things is better than nothing, but it's not first best. So I've had this little debate face to face with Bernie Sanders, and he said, no, I'm set in my ways and this is what I want to do, and that's that. But I don't think it's the right way answer for the country. It's not the right political answer. We're not going to get it to happen. So, but there's so many other things. I mean, think about Social Security. How are we going to, the system just reported a $59 trillion unfunded liability in the trustees report from 2021. It came out a couple months ago. 59 trillion is 2.5 years of GDP. The official debt is 1 year of GDP. Got
All right, now here's the key question that everyone is wondering about.
Okay.
If we had to choose one book by Larry Kotlikoff, and it was between Money Magic, which we have to pay for, and You're Hired, which is for free, which should we choose?
I think for our own personal, selfish needs, Money Magic, because this is going to give you guides for yourself, for your kids, for your parents, if you're supporting them, to a better financial life and less risk and more happiness for the same. But if you're at all inclined politically, and you have any connection to any senator, congressman, or the president directly, definitely download You're Hired and get it in their hands, because there are so many straightforward solutions that will appeal to both Democrats and Republicans.
Here's another final question.
Okay.
What do you have to say in your For Hired book about apprenticeship?
Well, I talk in Money Magic, and nothing about, a little bit about apprenticeship, but that 40% of kids who start college don't get through college. Only 30% of our high school graduates actually get through college. So we're basically a country of apprentices, a country of people that are not college graduated. We are a country
Well,
where
there are two different things, Larry.
Yeah.
There's the possibility of building a formal system, and you were in Germany, and about what a formal system looks like. I think that the informal system that we have.
You got to get him to write that chapter of Your
Hire.
Well,
let me say, I'm all for, be on this record, I'm all for apprenticeships. We need, since 70% of the kids are not going to be college graduated, we should not be driving, cramming this down people's throats and minds that they have to have any worth, they have to graduate college. That's crazy.
Okay,
we have to
say the right words.
Yeah. And I say this in spades in the book. I say Harvard is not going to be a ticket to success. Hard work. The reason Harvard collects people that are creative and do hard work and know how to work hard. They have Sitzfleisch. They can sit in a seat. Sitzfleisch in German means sit flesh. Your ability to sit for long hours and and get something done. And I say in the book, the two smartest kids in my class at Harvard were kids that failed out of high school, failed out of college. Spiek Williges admits these kids to grad school because he thinks they're brilliant. They were brilliant, but they didn't have Sitzfleisch and they never finished their PhD. So the two kids we thought when we got to grad school were going to just wipe us out. We were going to get kicked out of Harvard because they were going to kill us in all the exams. They didn't have the Sitzfleisch to study for the exams or to get their PhD. So that's what it takes, diligence. It's not, you can't live on prestige.
We call it delayed gratification.
Yes.
The marshmallow test, right?
And that's I think, key to, if I have any success, it's only thanks to being scared as hell that I had to, going back to supporting my parents, I had to work like crazy. And then I didn't know how my brother and sister would fare. So this kind of Jewish guilt, if you like, right from age 18, working 40 hours a week in college, this was no time to have fun. This was time to get serious. And then, connect my dad's business failing, him having Parkinson's. This is where I was coming from. And that's just stuck with me right to this point where here I am, 71, I'm working harder than ever and doing more and more. It's just ingrained now that I can't stop.
Well, that's inspiring, and that's
very inspiring. And how do we conclude, Bob? How do we conclude?
Sei gesund.
Sei
gesund, Larry. Thank you so much.
Be happy, and
I've learned a great deal from this, and I'm sure our listeners will as well.
And you guys have been a great inspiration to me, Zvi, especially because I've spent so much time. I got to thank you for helping me in so many aspects.
My pleasure. And of course, I got lots from you Still plenty the best is yet to come.
We're
Okay.
schlepping Nachas with each other, as we say in
Right.
Yiddish.
Okay, sei gesund.
Okay,
Speak to you
danke,
soon.
danke.
Bye.
This course, yeah, ciao.
Just a minute.